So Orpheus, like is really pissing off the wrath of this God, similar to Jesus being crushed and having to die for our sins, right? This is the story that we see, whether it be in the Greek mythology or in the Egyptian mythology or in the Sumerian mythology. It's always the same. And so he would sit and wait for the sun to come up, and he would play on his harp, and he would salute the sun, which represents the light of truth. He would not turn back. He would not believe in this darkness, in the God of death and destruction. He just wouldn't do it. Well, it really upset this God of destruction. And so what happens was that this God really gets angry and comes down there and just tears him up from limb to limb and sends him back to the underworld. And that's where he joins his beloved Eurydice in the underworld. And the Muses put the lyre among the stars, and there it is to this day. And we look at that area in the sky, we call it Lyra, or the lyre. And that's where the Christ child came out from the center of the galaxy and started this struggle with his bride. And this is you and I, friends. So if you go all the way back to Ptolemy, he's the one that first really started talking about this constellation and the brightest star in that constellation, which is Lyra, or Lyra. It has the same, well, today we call that star Vega, or actually the word is Vega. Chevy came out with a car called Vega, the old Vegas, and they were worthless cars, but they had aluminum blocks. But anyway, they called them Vegas, and everybody started saying Vega. But it's spelt the same way. But that word, when you're talking about the star, it's a very bright star straight up in the sky when you go out at night, right after it gets dark. That star is called Vega. Now, that comes from, it's like an Arabic word that means an eagle. And it can also mean the vulture, because they saw both an eagle and a vulture. Now I see what the symbolism is there. An eagle is wise, spiritual knowledge, right? Remember the phoenix bird, the wisdom of Enoch, or the phoenix, or the ancient Atlantean knowledge. So this bird represents the great wisdom. But at the same time, they saw in it also a vulture, which is a bad bird, right? It eats the carnal debris. So right there near that is the constellation Aquila, and that's where the star Altair is, and it has two stars beside that, which they depict as this flying eagle with his outstretched wings, and that's this great place of wisdom. And then you've got Beta Lyra, which is called Shiliak. That's an interesting spot, and we're going to explain a little bit about Shiliak. And that comes from the Arabic word that means harp, or this lyre, similar word, harp. And so they use that word to represent the whole constellation, but there's actually one star that is the center of that whole thing, and that's Shiliak. Well, there's a star right beside that called Gamma Lyra. It's called Sulafat, and that is the Arabic word meaning tortoise. Remember now, Orpheus took the tortoise and hollowed it out and made the lyre. So all of these stars are up there that are describing this whole thing. So between Beta and Gamma is this ring nebula. This is what we were just talking about, the Shiliak. It's a ring nebula. Now, there's been a lot of interesting stuff we've recently found out about this. And there was this French astronomer way back in 1779 or something that first discovered this. But they didn't really know what it was in those days. Of course, they didn't have the equipment and stuff that we have today. It's very interesting because this particular place is, at first they just thought it was like a nebula. But now they're beginning to think that it's perhaps some sort of black hole. For a while, that's what they decided. This is a black hole. Well, recently, they've come up with this new theory about quark matter. Now, I don't want to go into that. I don't really know a whole lot about that. But they're calling it strange matter. It's not really matter, and it's not really antimatter or anything. It's sort of matter that is here and is very transient. It's very cold. And I guess it doesn't give off a lot of light. So this is why they thought it was a black hole. Now, for those of you who don't know what a black hole is where there's an object so large that the mass, you see when you have a large mass, it pulls in, it has gravity. And like our Earth has a certain amount of gravity, enough to keep us on the ground so we don't float off. Well, if you've got a larger mass, there's going to be more gravity. Objects can get so large that their gravity is so strong that it pulls it into this little tight ball. It actually makes the mass smaller. Even though it's got more mass, it's dense, you see. And the gravity pulls it into this tight little ball. Well, then if it gets even stronger and more mass, it can actually get to a point where it pulls. The gravity is so strong it pulls the light in, so that it becomes a dark black hole. And so it wouldn't just be pulling the light in appearance, but in reality. In other words, it's literally sucking the matter and all the material things around it into this dark hole. Now, I don't believe that this particular place in the Lyre is a black hole. I think they're probably right about this quark matter. It is some sort of a transition. And as we said, the universe, or the galaxy, is consciousness, and the inner light that's in that, center is consciousness. And we are all conscious beings evolving and ascending down through the spiral arm. And as we finally reach this point that all the mythology says where we began, see, about 2,000 light years towards the center, it's where we all began this descent into Hades, and there's where this cross is, and this inner Christ child within us, you see, reaches this point, and then it dies on the cross. And so, right after that, you see this dark hole with this very strange material, some sort of quark matter, which means that it is transforming our soul and our consciousness at this point. And it's bringing it down into hell and making it ready for our incarnations on this particular place called Hades. And there are 7 gates in this realm. Now, this is what all this mythology is talking about, friends. It's very, very interesting. What we're talking about is ancient knowledge and wisdom. And I know for a lot of you, this isn't going to be clear to you that what I'm saying is correct. But stay with me, because we've got biblical scriptures, we've got lots of ancient mythology, and lots of information to cover. So, like it says in the Bible, so-and-so begot so-and-so, and they begot so-and-so, and they begot so-and-so. Well, a lot of these stories in the Bible are very symbolic. So, it is Lyra that begets Terra in our story so far, friends. Terra being Firma Terra, or Earth, or the physical world. And it is also Lyra that begets the Pleiades, which is also where Vega is born, and even Orion eventually, where we go through that last consciousness shift at the ninth gate of Hades. So, all of these places in this area is the realm of incarnation, the realm of the 12 sons of Zeus, or no, the 12 sons of Olympus. Zeus is simply one of the 12. And in the story in the Bible, Zeus would be the character we call Joseph. He went down into Egypt, and they began building these four-sided pyramids, this, carnal, dimensional, physical bodies, and becoming enslaved to the great Pharaoh, or that Draco that is this darkness and this chaos that leads us astray, as all of us enter in to this realm in the galaxy. So friends, there's lots of civilizations within this area. There's lots of things that we don't know about who we were and where we were, what kind of consciousness we were before we reached that area about 2,000 light years away from us here. But let's concentrate on this period of existence that we're in here today. So one of the stars in this area is called Vega, as we talked about. And in that area, you've got Alpha Centauri, Altair, that whole Draco system, which, represents the devil. Now remember, the Virgin is pursued by the dragon in Revelation. Well, some of the civilizations are in that Ursa Major, and some of those are just sort of minor players in the story. But let's stick to these major players. The Lyrians, the Syrians, the Vegans. These are civilizations that you and I have already lived on before we even got here. This is stages of our evolution that we have already come through, friends. So, in prehistory, there were certain creatures on this earth, and they were considered like a vegan colony. This is where our life began. Let's go back to Vega. And on that, there was certain incarnations of our Christ soul, where we began to colonize certain other places. And so one of the vegan colonies was here on Earth. And Vega is very close to Earth. But the Lyrians would cause a lot of trouble in this situation. So there were like generations and generations that went by, and the Syrians, who were from the vegans, they finally came back to the earth to claim the earth. And that's where this conflict begins in our Sumerian tablets. Because remember, the Sumerians talk about Sirius, and these are the Syrians. But where we start off 1,000,000 years ago, where these Syrians come to Earth, there's actually prehistory that goes back a long, long way. But before we go any further with this, I want you guys to understand something. Now, I'm not saying that this is some sort of like a terrible game that's being played on you, and you're like a little puppet and they're pulling the strings. See? Because of reincarnation, friends, what we're saying is that millions of years in the past, there were these beings that came here and did this and thus and so. Those beings were you, friends. You are the ones who are pulling the strings. You just don't know it. You've forgotten. So it was your forefathers who fought over you. And yet, your forefathers are you. It's an internal family struggle. So we're really fighting against ourselves, friends. Nobody's doing anything to us. A lot of people today think, oh, there's some big conspiracy and the elite are ruling over us. Well, they are. But you see, there's a lot more to this that we don't really understand. And it's time now that we understood that our Father in heaven is love. He loves us all. And everything is fair. And the only reason He allows these terrible sufferings and these bad things to go on is because He loves us. Because the suffering and all the bad things that's happening to us, we're doing to ourselves. He's patient with us, as it says in the book of Peter, that we might all attain to salvation. He waits patiently. And He teaches us. And He sends prophets to us from time to time to teach us the truth so that we can grow and finally learn to let go of our petty divisions. So, the Syrian group, they had knowledge. And they care about humanity. They are us, but they're more spiritual. And this is the group that's called Anu, Nibiru. These are where the story begins in the Sumerian tablets and the Egyptian writings and the pyramids and Atlantis and all of this is where it starts. So, the Lyrians are kind of more like the custodial gods. They're the authoritarian religious figures that basically are operating today in the Catholic Church. It's been going on for millennia, friends. So there's one group that's trying to enlighten, and there's another group that's trying to oppress. But it's really ourselves. And there's these two polarities within ourselves, and it's this raging war. The book of Revelation talks about the war that's in heaven that's going on right now. The dragon and his angels, and Michael and his angels. So the creation of mankind is this sort of joint effort. And there's some sort of a strange reluctance on the part of the Lyrians and the Syrians, who both want a race on earth to be created after their own purpose. So during the earliest times of mankind, the planet was divided into various areas where these overlords were in charge. They split up the earth amongst themselves. There were 70 gods, as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 32. And the Most High divided the earth. This is very similar to when Israel went into the land of Canaan and they conquered the land. They divided it up. And in there, they divided it up into 12, because this is the 12 sons of Jacob. But remember, Christ had 12 disciples and He also had 70 others. So the larger division was 70. So now when you go through the mythologies, you'll find that different civilizations had different names. Now remember, Inanna in the Sumerian text. Well, there was Kuan Yin in Asia, Isis in Egypt. See, these are all the same stories in different nations, in different mythologies. And they all represent the same basic thing. This is about the overlords during a given period of time in ancient past that were ruling over man and creating us. This is us in the past. So the consciousness that many of us have today of Isis, Kuan Yin, or whatever it may be, is more or less archetype. It's a shadow and a type, but it's a type of explanation of our past. These stories are more or less just parables of. So what we know about our past in these various stories, such as Isis and Kuan Yin in China, it's not really what we think it is. We've got to grasp that this is a parable. It's an archetype. It's a shadow. Remember how the Bible and the Apostle Paul says that it's all a type and a shadow. Paul's saying the whole Old Testament is just types and shadows. Do you grasp that, friends? Most of you that are listening to this video are Christians, and you realize that mythology is symbolic. Well, do you also realize that the Old Testament is not history? It is a shadow. It is a type. It is a parable. This is spelled out for us very clearly by the apostles. I'm not making this up, friends. But it's time that we woke up and realized that the entire story in the Old Testament is not literal history. It's a personification of the overlords and the gods and the archetypes. Early Christianity talked about this very clearly. The archons and the demiurges, these were not realities. They were not literal. It is only symbolic. So you see, this God, capital G, is sometimes referred to in the ancient writings as being this real man with this white beard and this long white flowing beard and long white hair. And in the very, very ancient writings, you see, is anthropomorphic, a physical person. But you see, there were extraterrestrial beings that came to this place, this earth, thousands of years ago. And they were not really the divine being any more than you and I are the divine being. We're physical beings, made in the image of the divine being. Yes, we are divine, but we are not what we're looking for when we're looking for the great creator of all. So, throughout all the ages, the true nature has been deliberately manipulated and has been changed to keep people under control. It's been distorted throughout the passing of time, friends. So we've got to understand that it's only, what we're saying is only going to represent our past. It is not an exact history. It's going to be communicated to you guys by me in order to make sense to you. We can't describe what happened millions of years ago in a literal way. So there are hidden agendas. Many, many hidden agendas is going on this planet. Some of these agendas are, they're going to challenge our way of thinking. Once we find out about these things, it's going to blow our mind. And most of you who've been watching this channel and listening to some of the things I'm saying, you're probably starting to realize this, that this is only the tip of the iceberg, friends. I mean, we haven't even really gotten into any of it. But let's just give an example, friends. And this, I hope, does not stumble my entire subscriber audience. I hope I don't lose everybody with this. But I've got to make progress, friends, because I know that some of you actually want to know the truth. So, let's give an example. Where are we being deceived? Where is it that we're not getting this real truth? And how are we being deceived into believing lies? Let's take monogamy. Alright? Now, this idea of monogamy is very, very touchy for a lot of people. I know. People are going to get angry just because I'm going to say the things that I'm about to say. It's going to push a lot of buttons. But, friends, way back in ancient days, on this planet, there was a deliberate lie that was put forward. And what was it put forward for? For their own advantage. And what it was is that we were their slaves. And they needed us to breed. Oh my goodness, friends, this is the truth. Just look at the law of Moses. It is about slavery. It is about property rights. I was telling somebody the other day, in the Old Testament, there was no law against rape. I know a lot of you go, oh, Dave, now, I got a scripture right here that says don't rape. No, it doesn't. Read it carefully. A man could go out and take a woman and even against her will. And all the punishment was that he had to marry her, and if she didn't want to marry him, then he had to pay her father so many shekels of silver. Because you see, she was property, and her father owned her, and if you were going to take her virginity, you had to pay it. Because now he couldn't get as big a price for her as if she had been when she was a virgin. So it was about property. And so women were property. And this was a breeding program. There were direct bloodlines that these extraterrestrial beings wanted to have power over. It was a genetic structure. And it was primarily the women, friends. Now, there's still some sort of latent genetic code that makes females, have this idea that there's got to be some sort of monogamy.